Hi, my name is Zizaran, and for this video we have a build guide for the upcoming 3.9 Metamorph League. And this is going to be a Arc Trap and an Arc Mine guide. And the last time I pushed this out was also 1 year ago exactly for the Betrayal League in December. So it is kind of cool that it's coming back exactly 1 year later. So if you're wondering what has changed this patch, the range from which Arc could chain has been increased by 10 units. It went from 25 to 35, letting it chain off to enemies further away than it normally could. And that should be pretty great. It's not as far and won't off-screen as much as it used to back in the day. But especially with a few new things coming that I'll talk about during the video, then I think Arc should be a really great choice. I would generally say that mines are stronger than traps, but a lot of people do prefer the trap play style. So I figured I would include both options. This time we've split them into two separate paths of buildings to make it easier. It can be a little bit complicated when both the skill trees are in the same POB. However, as you can see, they are very similar and there's not too much changes, and it's also fairly easy to change between them. I want to talk a little bit about the build. So with either arc traps or arc mines, that means that you support the gem, then with the trap support or the mine support, and you will run around either placing these, and that will fire off the arc. Now, this is fairly viable from leveling very early on. Now, obviously, you don't get Onslaught, but Onslaught did also get a nerf this patch. It's going to be harder to keep it up anyway. So once you get to Innocence in Act 5 and you can use an Onslaught Flask just for the movement speed, if you're trying to go fast, that will feel pretty nice. Obviously, this will not increase your trap throwing speed. So it is completely viable to level as the main skill that you want. You don't have to level with something else and then respec later. You would want to do a respec because of you want to start as just, percentage elemental damage, and then later on you want to transition into crit. You can transition fairly early. I'd say you really want a Diamond Flask, which you first get guaranteed in Act 7. In Trade League, you would be able to buy it earlier from other players. They can drop around level 28, maybe 26. So that is my main recommendations on that. Normally on crit builds, I end up switching to crit build once I am in Blood Aqueduct, and I can stay there for a while, farm some gear, and just have a good time in Blood Aqueduct grinding out a tabula. First, I'm going to start by explaining how we use Path of Building in the guides, and we use it quite a lot more than most guides you might be used to. If you've already seen this part, you can move to the description down below and click a timestamp button to skip directly to the guide. So first you need Path of Building. Path of Building is a third-party program that you can download, and it's in the description down below. It's completely safe and most people use it. It's a very powerful tool that lets you plan out your builds and import items, stuff like that. Now, once you have Path of Building, you can go and import the Path of Building link here by pasting it here. Once you have that, it should look, well, it depends what build you're importing, because I'll use this for everything. But it should look like the build of the video you're watching. And what we do, and I'm using a Gladiator Thunder Cyclone build here as an example, I show a step-by-step of what the skill tree looks like at certain levels. So at early levels, it's very easy, especially if you're a new player, to follow. And I also say when to ascend, and the ascension points are generally here, and I'll talk about that in the specific video as well and why things are chosen. But as you can see, the skill tree is evolving over time, and sometimes there will be variations for, if it's different weapons, if it's one-hander, two-hander, and a lot of things like that. But wait, there's more. Under the skills, we usually do all the different skills plus the leveling one. I'm trying out a new sort of alphabetized group. So this is your main attack skill. So as you can see here, you have ground slam to 8 to 12, but at 12 it gets replaced by Sunder, and I kept that in the same A, just so you're understanding what I'm replacing it with if there's no leveling video accompanying it. So hopefully that'll make it very clear. Same here with obviously at early level you're using Ancestral Protector, and then you replace that same B with War Chief later on. So we'll also put notes, like for example here, Pulverize doesn't exist yet in Path of Building, and there's a few things that they're just not in Path of Building at the time that I'm making this guide. This is going to happen a lot on videos that are made around launch, just Path of Building's not updated yet. So that's just not what much we can do about. And for the most part, I'll always put gems in a priority level. Like my first priority is always going to be Onslaught, just because it ups your clear speed so much while killing. And you can see like different utilities and stuff. And another example here is plus Blood and Sand, because that again doesn't exist in Path of Building. We also have different types of items. So here we have early game axes, mid game axes, and end game axes. I think the jewels are displayed here. Yes. So the way I do this is I make some like fairly okay items that are like, you know, depending on how fast you play, somewhere that you'll have them between day 1 to 3. And if you don't know how to get a Tabula, for example, you can farm that in Act 9 fairly easily in Blood Aqueduct. And we go through here, and it's I never in my guides will put resists on the life gear, because just you need to be resist capped. That's very important. 75% all resist. Remember that you lose resist in Act 5 and 10. And then on the jewels, I'll try to do 4-slot jewels and try to say as many good stats as possible for that build. So there's no like, you don't see the same one twice here, but all of these work for the build. Hopefully that'll help. And then this is generally how I recommend rolling flasks. There's even more in the notes as well. Mr. Madiki will generally go through and tell you exactly where to buy the skill gems that you're needed. This is actually a tip by another streamer called Lyric, who said he was sad there was nothing like this in Path of Exile guides. So I was like, that is actually a great idea for new players. So we have that. So if you're wondering where to buy things, or if it can't be bought by your specific class, we call it a mule. Then you have to use another character to use it or to buy it. And all the details for that is in here. So hopefully it now makes more sense how to use the guides and how they work. Let's continue with the build guide. So with all my builds, we include a like early game and a late game. They're not very different for both, like, you know, traps or mines. As you can see, I still don't put resists on my gear. The main thing here is just get resist capped as well as you can. It doesn't really matter what particular piece you have it on. And one of the main things that I cannot stress enough, roll your flasks. Make sure you have like the main priorities is get bleed immunity and freeze immunity. These are your two core things that you really do want. An instant or bubbling life flask, so that's seething or bubbling. Ideally on a divine once you hit level 60, but I would try to start getting these earlier too. And one of the big changes now since the last time I put out a guide like this is that we now have the enduring prefix for mana flasks, which is really great because we do utilize minor matter on this build, and enduring means that even though like it hits full, it keeps going, so you can just spam that flask every time that you get charges. And for example, if you have heat or staunching on those, you'll be, you know, immune to freeze or immune to shock or whatever you do end up putting on your enduring flask pretty much permanently. So early on, it's mostly fairly basic with like we're starting out with lots of life gear. And our weapon, I really like getting like cold damage if at all possible on your weapon. The reason for this is if you can get like even a tier 4 or tier 3 cold damage to spells roll, what that does is it allows you to start shattering monsters. Now obviously the less cold damage that you actually have, the more likely it is that really big monsters are not going to be able to be shattered. So obviously this stat is good. Another thing that changed this patch that is great for our build is that you can get a lot higher spell damage rolls. I believe it goes up to like 109 now. So including hybrid, I guess that means you can get 140 maybe 150. Very high spell damage on your wands, which is obviously a great stat for us. Some negative things that did get nerfed was the extra elemental damage. did get nerfed. Speaking of buffs and nerfs, there are some other really great changes for the build. There is now a awakened added lightning support gem, which will add +1 lightning to your arc if you use that as a support gem. So this is definitely something I would recommend. That is obviously a huge boost. We also have an awakened chain gem adding +1 chain. So there is some crazy cool stuff that we will be able to experiment with as the league goes on. Obviously, this league adds 4 new types of Exalted Orbs that the Conquerors can drop. We don't really know all of the mods. Some of the mods might be amazing for Arc, but that's obviously not something I have access to or can predict ahead of time. So you might have to explore that as the league comes on. I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware that these are coming in. But looking at the rest of our gear, I would recommend early on farming either a Tabula or spamming a lot of Val side areas to hoping for a corrupted 6-link. And do remember that if you find a corrupted 6-link but it doesn't have the colors that you desire, important to remember that if you put it in your crafting bench, you can still recolor this at the cost of both Val Orbs and Chromatics. As for the endgame differences between traps and mines, there's again not too much of a gear difference. Some other things that are really nice to pick up would probably be a lot of the new mods, but also still a lot of great shaper items. Some others include like the chest. Shaper chest, you can roll spell crit chance as well. So it's a lot easier to maximize your crit. On jewels as well, there's a lot of different stats you can get. And do remember, jewels is one of the bigger damage boosts in the game. I would recommend only taking like 2 and 3 point jewels once you actually have a decent jewel. For example, a life and double damage. If you're wondering what kind of damage mods you can use on these builds, obviously you trap damage, mine damage. And then you also have critical strike multiplier with lightning skills, elemental skills, critical strike multiplier. You have spell damage and spell damage while holding a shield. Lightning damage. So there's quite a lot of different mods you can get on a jewel. And then pair that with life and you're looking at a fairly solid jewel. On the like hypnotic jewels, you can just get, flat added cold, flat added lightning, and life. You cannot use things like increased damage if you've killed recently, because when you're throwing traps and mines, it doesn't count as you killing them. Now, one of the rings I recommend is an Essence Worm. It lets you reserve an aura for free. So for example, you can throw in Wrath and then still keep loads of mana left for Minor Matter. Another thing that I like using quite a lot is Call of the Brotherhood. Now the usage for this is turning a bunch of your lightning damage into cold damage, and that makes you shatter pretty much every enemy. You leave no corpses. It's a really nice crunchy feeling and just a bunch of fun, and definitely worth doing. Especially if you're in hardcore, being able to remove the corpses of your enemies is a huge defense. So make sure you look into that. If you don't have one and you're in hardcore and you still want to shatter early, if you can't manage to get added cold on your weapon, you can also look into actually using added cold. Now, we do get quite a lot of defense on this build, particularly on mines. You have things like, for example, Destructive Apparatus, doing more damage reduction. You can get Fortify on the build with Vigilant Strike. I then particularly recommend using the Vigil unique jewel, which makes it last for like 30-40 seconds. The way you would play this, you would run up to a boss, slap it with Vigilant Strike, then you've got a really strong Fortify effect. A lot of people are probably going to be scared. Obviously, you saw that Fortify was nerfed. It is still extremely good, particularly for builds that aren't stacking a ton of reduction. The nerf mostly affected builds that were trying to get near immunity by stacking over 100% Fortify effect and doing multiple like Fortify effects or similar effects from different sources. So Fortify is very much one of the best damage reductions in the game still. For the mine version as well, I'd say like look into using Val Molten Shell. I really like it if you have at least a Granite Flask. It depends a little bit on what stage of the game you're in. Endgame, a Basalt Flask might be what you have to fit, because obviously that does percentage damage reduction. But the you end up with like an additional 3k life from when you're popping a Val Molten Shell when you only have a Granite on. On the Trapper version, we did put in Acrobatics and Face Acrobatics as well. So there's some differences in defense there. I would say that the Mine version is tankier. So both of these should be very strong for doing the majority of the end game and stuff like that. We obviously don't know how they're going to work against the new bosses, but I have fairly big hopes for them. This is something I'm sort of tempted to run as a league starter as well. Do remember that the ascendancies are shown in the different sections of the POB skill trees, so when you're clicking on them it'll say what to take as your Merc Lab points, Crew Lab points. They are different depending on if you're going traps or mines, so bear that in mind when you are looking at the skill trees. Another nice thing about this build, do remember that the build is immune to shock and you're immune to ignite, so that is very nice. That's your Uber Lab point Pyromaniac. As for your Pantheons and stuff like that, I would say do Solaris as your major Pantheon, and then you want to do Shikari when you can upgrade the Poison Immunity as your minor Pantheon. Bandits on both builds is you want to help Alira. This gives you resist early on, as well as an additional crit and some mana regen. Should be very easy to fit everything on this build, and also remember that you do want to level up a bunch of arcs in your offhand. Spell level is very, very important for this build, so if you can get a level 20 or 21 arc, that is huge. So throughout the entire game on this build, you are most likely going to end up using a mana flask, especially since the build is mind over matter. Yeah, you really, really do want to, especially. An enduring mana flask helps a lot. So for this build, there's a lot of great things for leveling. If you have it as the second or third character, even things like Hypnotic Jewels with spell damage while you're leveling is great. Another thing, well, it's not a unique. You can get +1 to all lightning gems on wands. You can get that at level 2. So they're crazy. I would definitely recommend that. If you've gotten far enough that you can get fossils, you can throw a, for example, scorched and metallic fossil on a glove, and you could end up getting double global damage. That'll just say specifically adds lightning damage, and then it'll affect even your spells or heralds. So that's really nice. Obviously a tabula, gold rim, just the normal stuff like that. There's not like any particular unique that springs to mind as amazing for leveling. Something that's really nice on a lot of builds is anointing a career ward with the Fleetfoot node. Gives you a lot of movement speed and will make things like your flame dash or any charges recover faster that are related to movement. So the mind build uses mind over matter, life, fortify, and pretty decent regen, and a combination of energy shield and evasion. So you have some fairly layered defense. It's definitely not one of the tankiest builds. Like, it's not like a ES Guardian or an occultist with like crazy beefy ES. But for a life or a hybrid build, it is very, very tanky. Should do really well for most things. The trap build uses acrobatics and face acrobatics, so it'll have slightly less energy shield, and I wouldn't recommend trying to scale armor on it, but it also has very nice defense, but definitely less than the mine version. So for sustaining on this build, you're going to be regening life as soon as you have the regen ascendancy node. You obviously have an instant life flask as well, and your eternal mana flask should be keeping your mana pretty much full the entire time. So for auras on this build, you're going to use a precision at level 1. This is just to get some additional crit, and it's very, very cheap and only costs 1 gem slot. You're also going to want skitterbots. They did get a nerf, but it was not a very big one. They're definitely a crazy, crazy good addition to the build and a very, very cheap aura. Wrath I would only use if you have an Essence Worm. You can use Heralds while leveling, but do remember that the actual Herald effect, like the Shatter or the Thunder, will not proc. Let's say this build is like fairly all around very, very strong. They have changed a few things, like apparently bosses that have an immunity phase where they stand around talking for a little bit, and you would normally be able to throw down a lot of traps to one-shot the boss. Apparently they have a massive damage reduction at the start, so we don't really know how hard that's going to hit yet. It might be that you can still one-shot it with enough damage, but most likely it'll just like eat up the majority of your traps, and then you'll have to like keep throwing down more or mines to kill it after. So as far as financial hurdles go for this build, it's fair to assume that it's going to be pretty meta. Arc just got buffed, and it's a very popular skill to play. It's also very fun. I could see that a lot of items you want for the build could end up being highly sought after. However, this is also a very easy build to roll gear for yourself. It's a great choice for solo self-fun. If you're struggling with damage on the mine one, you could experiment with ball lightning as well. It's supposed to have like quite a lot of damage. I'd say you kind of want like lesser or greater multiple projectiles for that to get some clear, but definitely worth experimenting with. Both are very fun skills as well. But generally the build should be like very easy to understand. On traps, you just like right click on the mines. You'll have to, you know, throw the mines down and then detonate them. It's very high power build with very low investment. You can find most of it yourself, even if it does end up being fairly popular. Should have fairly high single target. It should feel pretty good for farming maps as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this build guide. I'll be trying to put out as many as possible before launch. If you're looking for something to watch this December, I should be live for most of it, and we're also doing a massive giveaway from the 13th to the 25th. Drop by my channel at twitch.tv/Zizaran. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and try to die less than I do.